Alors bonsoir. Au nom de la Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine, de sa présidente Marie-Christine Labourdette, de son directeur général Luc Lièvre, de la directrice du musée Corinne Bélier, je vous remercie de votre présence ce soir et je suis ravie de vous retrouver nombreux malgré un contexte peu propice. Nous poursuivons ce cycle de conférences consacrées à l'Art nouveau en Europe avec une avant-dernière conférence consacrée au centre du Nord. Et je remercie chaleureusement Jeremy Howard, maître de conférence à l'université écossaise de St Andrew et un des plus grands spécialistes de l'Art nouveau européen, d'avoir accepté notre invitation pour parler de ce thème qui lui est cher. Donc après Vienne, Paris et Nancy, un saut hélas manqué à Bruxelles, nous voyagerons ce soir de Novgorod à Glasgow en passant par Saint-Pétersbourg, Stockholm, Helsinki et Riga. Je vous rappelle pour la dernière fois que la fin de l'exposition Otto Wagner, maître de l'Art nouveau, approche et qu'il ne vous reste qu'une semaine jusqu'au 16 mars prochain pour la voir et la revoir. Enfin, j'espère vivement vous retrouver dans cet auditorium lundi prochain pour la dernière conférence de ce cycle. Teresa Sala, professeure à l'Université de Barcelone, nous présentera l'Art nouveau à Barcelone et en Catalogne. Je vous remercie de ne pas oublier de rendre vos casques à l'issue de la conférence, parce que c'est arrivé lors de ces dernières soirées. Voilà, je vous remercie pour votre attention et, cher Jérémy, je vous laisse la parole.
Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Je suis désolé, je ne parlais pas français. So I'll speak in English. I'm sorry. My second language is Russian, so I could talk in Russian if you like, but the translators weren't ready for that. So today I'm going to talk to you about Art Nouveau, what we consider Art Nouveau in the North, and in a way what we consider the North. I think it's a problem. It's not resolved. There are difficulties in defining Art Nouveau that, in a way, the exhibition that is here in this building introduces, and maybe also these conferences, this series of lectures, shows that Art Nouveau can be quite different for different places and even within different places. And that will come across today, I think. My concentration today will be partly because I'm working the last 40 years in, maybe not quite 40, in St Andrews in Scotland. I'll talk a little bit about Glasgow, but my focus will essentially be on St Petersburg. And I'll look at what's in between as well. But St. Petersburg, in many ways, is the forgotten capital of Northern Art Nouveau. There were estimates or statistics vary according to which tables you use, but people reckon there are 1,614 examples of Art Nouveau buildings in St. Petersburg, which really outdoes many of the other centers of Art Nouveau in the North, and maybe anywhere, actually. We tend now to think of Northern Art Nouveau, particularly from where I am, on the British Isles, and maybe also here in Paris, in terms perhaps of Riga Art Nouveau as the capital of Latvia. That's because that's become much more accessible to us after it joined the EU, I suspect. I started going while it was still part of the Soviet Union, and Riga represents a very special case for Art Nouveau. I won't talk about that much today, but I will introduce it. It was, of course, part of the Russian Empire when it's developed, and its building of Art Nouveau structures is really a kind of national awakening, as well as something that comes from Russia, as well as from Germany, largely. So. And it blends modern traditions and medieval traditions and the pagan traditions of what it is to be Latvian. but that is much more of a kind of little jewel than a really big center of Northern Art Nouveau. So what I want to do is essentially introduce the forgotten capital of Northern Art Nouveau, and that's St. Petersburg. I will run through a few themes as I speak that I've put on the screen, and which almost indicate this ambiguity, the ambivalence of the name, the theme of Art Nouveau. It's not really a style, it's more diverse than that. It's a movement. I'm not even sure it's really a movement. 25 years ago, I wrote a book on Art Nouveau for my students, and I called it Art Nouveau, International and National Styles in Europe. And of course, they wanted Vienna on well, it comes out of Vienna, it's Klimt on the cover, but for Brussels. So the connection is made in this book, and I tried to expand the usual boundaries when I was writing in the mid-1990s from the locus of Brussels and Paris and Glasgow into Central and Eastern Europe. So I devoted quite a lot of time to Budapest and Prague, for example, as well as Riga and Helsinki. So let me see if I can use this today. I don't know whether I can. I think I have to point it in a certain direction. Maybe I can move this over here too. I put from Nizhny Novgorod to Glasgow on the screen, and I called it the northern wingspan of Art Nouveau. When I was writing this paper, preparing it, I thought really of wings and span. I hadn't been given a particular one center of Art Nouveau, one place. And therefore, you know, what is the north? Does it begin in Iceland, and where does it end? Does it end in Alaska? I don't know. But I decided to focus on Nizhny Novgorod and Glasgow. And between that, we sort of have the northern continent of Europe. And then I thought, well, I'll break down the talk today into various themes, starting with a way of introducing the subject as far as I'm concerned, and which I tried to do to an extent in this book, was to look at the exhibitions. That they aren't Art Nouveau exhibitions per se, they are exhibitions that explore the modern language, the modern idiom, as well as modern kind of looking back and traditions and searching for roots that are implicit and sometimes explicit in the vocabulary, the idiom of Art Nouveau. So exhibitions have a primary place in forging what becomes the material language of the movement of Art Nouveau. So that's why I'm starting with that. Then I moved to St. Petersburg and then Glasgow. Glasgow really doesn't have that much Art Nouveau. And if you are working in Glasgow, and a lot of my colleagues do, of course, they concentrate on the architecture and the art of Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And Mackintosh and the Glasgow Four, the McNairs and his wife Margaret MacDonald, they had a really tough time making it as Art Nouveau stylists or artists and architects because of the conservative nature of Glasgow. So even though they were pioneering a way, they were somehow pushed to the side as well. And that has meant that in the writing, the historiography of the Glasgow style, it's not very often considered as Art Nouveau because it's a little kind of special kind of side of Glasgow. And some of my colleagues would argue, oh no, Mackintosh is his own artist. He doesn't belong to any movement. And yet he has a huge dialogue with Vienna, as we might see today. And as if you know Mackintosh's style, you would be aware from looking at some of the Wagner works in the exhibition here. So it's a very special place, Glasgow, for a certain kind, for a limited kind of Art Nouveau. So we'll see that. And then if I have time at the end, if I haven't talked too much, dwell too much. I'll quickly run through another abiding theme of mine, and that is to look at the institutions of learning, particularly primary and secondary learning. And I've been writing about this, in fact, with a Parisian art and architectural historian, Annie Renoncy, for a long time. And we have looked at the buildings of schools. And we have, not just me, but a whole kind of little network of people. And so for me, what came out as most important from this network of interests was the Art Nouveau schools. And I started to trace, I mean, if you go to Brussels, you could see the schools of Jacob, Henri Jacob, for example, and also Victor Otto designed a kindergarten there, as far as I remember. So, and Mackintosh in Glasgow, his primary buildings are schools for children and for art students. So education is a good place to look for Art Nouveau. And even in the biggest city closest to me, Dundee, on the east coast of Scotland, a lot of the buildings were schools. This was the time of the expansion of mass education, public education, and they built in an Art Nouveau, a muted Art Nouveau style, a kind of functionalist, rationalist Art Nouveau. And some people would say that Art Nouveau is irrationalist. There is this kind of tussle within the scholarship that says, oh, I think it was John Richards and maybe Nicholas Pevsner wrote that Art Nouveau is the irrationalist style. Well, it's not. It has an irrationalist side, there's no doubt about it. But it can be a very rationalist introduction to modernism, in my opinion. And that comes across with someone like Wagner in particular. So, then I'll have maybe a tiny little question mark epilogue at the end. And we'll see whether we get to that, but that might be a little surprise. Okay, so let me see whether I can operate this. This is Riga, Eisenstein, Michael Eisenstein on Albert Jelle. And of course, he uses the bird and the heads and the masks a great deal. This is a kind of decorative Art Nouveau, just on a very ordinary building, actually, within. The floor plan and the elevations are very regular, it's rectilinear. There's nothing experimental beyond this kind of mask of the facade. And yet there's a whole street of this stuff. In fact, there are 2 or 3 streets in the modern part of Riga. They're fantastic. All the tourists go there and they, selfies in front of this stuff. And it's all very vulgar, actually. But it's lovely at the same time. It's over-embellished. Michael Eisenstein came from St. Petersburg. Obviously, he was of German-Jewish background, but trained and brought up in the Russian capital. And then he borrows sort of pattern books from Germany, and he sees these facades, and he more or less copies them for his private patrons. This is, of course, the era of new patronage, when there's a nouveau riche, they're merchants, they're industrialists, and they want to show that they can build their tenements in this exotic style, very fashionable one. And so this is a big advert for the patrons of Eisenstein, actually, who is the father of Sergei Eisenstein, the film director, of course, who hated his father. But that's another story. So this isn't really original. If you want to find more original stuff in Riga, you go and look at the works of Eijens Lauber and Konstantin Pekšins, and they start to introduce Latvian motifs into their buildings, and it's a heavier use of rough rubble. I'll show you one example if I get to that, of their style. Okay, so moving on. When I wrote this crazy book, I thought I would, I had, for my classes, this is before I started using PowerPoints or anything like that, I'd actually drawn this as a flow diagram, and it felt more organic. when they printed it, for some reason they couldn't use my nice curvy lines. So they printed it in the book like this. And I actually envisaged it more as three-dimensional. I think Art Nouveau has a synthetic quality. It's about Gesamtkunstwerk, this totally integrated work of art and design and aesthetic. And I've really wanted this to kind of come out of the page and for the lines between the different strands that are informing the Art Nouveau movement to be much more pliable, flexible, and therefore stronger, really, than these little kind of computer-driven lines that join this background to Art Nouveau, this informing qualities. Science and technology, of course, is pushing forward what you can do with structures as well as what you can envisage you can do. And so architects were joining with engineers in the wake of the Eiffel Tower, largely, I suppose. So 1889 really is a great impetus for the movement. But at the same time, these craft revival or national styles, there's a new wave of finding our national identity occurring at the end of the 19th century. So who are we? Where do we come from? What are our roots? And how can we express them in a way that both promotes our identity but says that we are moving forward at the same time? And that happens in Britain with William Morris. John Ruskin has given some impetus to that. But also maybe Viollet-le-Duc here is also pushing in the same direction. So I think we have to consider these craft revival styles, which look back to a kind of medieval guild-like quality of the art production. And that informs what Art Nouveau will become. So there's an attempt to be modern, an attempt to be looking back and informed by looking back, but also by a new understanding of nature, of course. And that understanding of nature is connected with symbolist movements of going inside, being introspective, being psychological sometimes, not being about just what the eye will see, but what the mind conveys or perceives. And also, this is informed by the new wave of Japonism. And that is incredibly sensitive quality of line, of space, that gives a new impetus to the visual language of our arts in Europe from the 1880s, really through the 1890s, that is the backdrop to Art Nouveau. And of course the historicist styles as well, as they become more eclectic and then they're abandoned. So, yes, here we go, moving on. I will come back to these examples on the right side of the screen in a moment, but in a way they do reflect this ambivalence, these two strands. I've deliberately kept them quite visual, one slightly more historicist and allegorical, and also more 3D, more three-dimensional in the way that the relief work is coming out of the building. But you can see that it's not all like that, that there are these kind of punch squares and circles, use of very simple geometric forms that are backing up this mournful angel, as she's known in St. Petersburg. But also there is this sense of new flat friezes in maiolica, ceramics, covering deliberately northern buildings that are suggesting a Nordic identity that could be a connection with Scandinavia, and also a Russian connection with Scandinavia. After all, there is a Russian lineage of Russian kings, pre-Tsars, who have descended from the Vikings. And there is this meeting in Russia of Scandinavian and Slav trends, as well as Finno-Ugric, actually. So we see that being expressed in these buildings that stress a northern quality. And I'll be coming back to this in particular. This frieze is by a particular artist who had Baltic roots, Nicholas Röhrich. Now, Röhrich dies in New York. Well, maybe he didn't die in New York. I think he did, but he is a globalist in many respects. But early on in his career, he wants to wed in his visual language, and he's exploring this in many different media, the northern roots, the Viking roots of Russia, and the Byzantine heritage as well. So there's this bringing together of these two often vastly different sides, and Röhrig is a kind of spokesman for that. In a way, he could be the Gustav Klimt. There are various Gustav Klimts, who are offshoots of Otto Wagner within the Russian Empire that I'll be mentioning today. So if I say that too often, oh, he's another Gustav Klimt, excuse me, but I might say it a few times. Okay. So I tried to find a map that represents Northern Europe at the time, and it's quite hard actually to see it. In a way, the centers I look at, they're mainly between the 55th and the 60th parallel latitude, and not much further north. I mean, I could have I'm going to Archangel next month, and there's very little Art Nouveau left there, but there is some, and I will be looking out for it, and it's mainly in the documents now. There are photographs and plans surviving, but because a lot of it was built in wood, it gets destroyed in fires or it's lost anyway. And actually, wooden Art Nouveau is a characteristic feature of a lot of the northern parts, and that's why it has a limited lifespan too. But I include Paris because, as you'll see, because there is a particular inflection of the movement in Paris at the 1900 World Exhibition. So that's why I include Paris and the looking north that happens there. I've got Glasgow, I've got Norrköping in Sweden, I've got Helsinki or Helsingfors on the map, I got Riga, I got Moscow and St. Petersburg. Moscow, of course, wasn't the capital, but it does have a beautiful little, well, it has a lot of Art Nouveau, actually, Moscow. But it has had more written about it, in English language at least, than St. Petersburg. And that is largely because it's been the capital for most of the 20th century and all of the 21st century, and it's dominated financially, really, economically, the output of literature, and swayed things. And Nizhny Novgorod. Nizhny Novgorod is incredibly important. So Nizhny Novgorod introduces the exhibitions, and I will show, of course, this is the era of burgeoning, post-Crystal Palace 1851 in London. This is the era of never-ending exhibitions, really taking off and celebrating what is new, what is national, what is international, what is commercial, what is industrial, what is technical. All kinds of things are celebrated in the exhibitions. And so I had to be very careful in what I chose for today. And I thought Nizhny Novgorod, Paris, and Glasgow would be enough. So excuse me if I'm missing out your favorite exhibitions, but had to choose something. So Nizhny Novgorod, I might need my notes here because there are some little kind of technical details I have to refer to, and statistics for this. It's called the All-Russian Industrial and Art Exhibition, and it's held between May and October 1896, and it's huge. Nizhny Novgorod had been the place. You saw where it is on the map. Oh, right over there. It's not yet as far as the Ural Mountains. There is Art Nouveau, actually, in Yekaterinburg, in Perm, in Kazan, in Tobolsk, and Tomsk, which is off the map. There's even Art Nouveau in Russian Manchuria, Harbin, because of the building of the Trans-Siberian Railway. There's Art Nouveau in Vladivostok, quite a lot, actually. So make a trip to Vladivostok. I'm sorry, it was too far south for me to include. So that's why it's not here. Yeah, forward we go, forward. So Nizhny Novgorod had been the site for many years, actually for a century, of annual fairs. and it's located on the Volga, where the Volga and the Oka rivers meet. Volga being the longest, biggest river in Europe, and a huge trading route, really, traditionally. But at the time of the end of the 19th century, it's also being served by the railways. And so it's almost reinventing itself when the Tsar, the last Tsar, the year of his coronation, Nicholas II, decides to invest huge money in this celebration of art and industry in Nizhny Novgorod. So the place, the setting for the exhibition is already there. Huge. I didn't show you, I haven't got any site plans for it, which I should have put in maybe. And there are plans of other exhibitions and photographs that I could have shown. But you get a sense from this of the kind of pavilions that were put up. Most important, perhaps, in some respect, was, and this is where I need to look at my notes, Vladimir Shukhov's high-grid, diagrid hyperboloid structures. He built a 37-meter water tower and a rotunda. Now, this rotunda, which you can see being built on the right, I actually can show you some more views of it, had this tensile grid shell for this canopy, and it was the largest in the world to date. It was the first hyperboloid structure of its kind, and its surface was generated by rotating hyperbola. And it was an incredible kind of masterpiece of modern engineering that has huge impact into the 20th century on modern design. But we've largely forgotten about it in Western histories of engineering and architecture, unfortunately. The tower has survived, and it's no longer in Nizhny Novgorod, but someone bought it, and it's survived. And other Shukhov towers were built that have also survived. Some are nearer Moscow. But for me, what is important possibly for today, and I did write about this exhibition and the different kinds of pavilions that were there, so I won't labor the point today in my book. But important is the far north, because I want to stress this northern connection. And I love this design. It's by an artist, Konstantin Korovin. And Korovin, he actually got together with Lev Kekushev, who was a actually trained architect who made Art Nouveau buildings in Moscow, and designed this. And it is the Pavilion of the Far North. And he took the forms, these steep pitch, plain facades, plain, almost atectonics, almost light building form from the northern trading stations on the Arctic coast of northern Russia, for the fishermen, for the timber exporting trade, etc. So he copied them, he extrapolated from them and made a modern pavilion with glass. So clerestory lighting coming in and lighting the interior. And also it was kind of a human zoo as well, because he used some northern people, nenets, samoyeds, as, you know, getting drunk and doing kind of funny things to be entertaining to the people, and introduce these small nations of the north to the international public. There were huge international... I wonder if people went from France, actually. I bet they did. They certainly went from Britain. And they would have come from the Middle East and from China there. I bet they came from France. It's maybe something worth following up. And Austria, I suspect, too. So he created this feeling of ice, of snow as well. And I think that's a kind of polar bear sculpture at the entrance. So this stressing of the north. And inside, these are a couple from the Nenets folk who are with their reindeer herders. They're living by reindeer. And you can see the pelts, the reindeer pelts on their sledge there. That was Korovin's first plan, and forget about it saying Siberia. So he drew that, and then Kekushev actually realized, talking together with Korovin. There's a lot written about Korovin, actually, more than there is on Kekushev. Some of the slides, I'm afraid, might be a bit pixelated. You can see that he's using sometimes the onion dome too, and that will come across more often as we go through today. We'll see that blending with the northern steep, simple pitch. This is part of the interior. So you've got seal pelts, different kinds of furs being shown there. And then also Korovin's painting. He had spent a year or so painting in the far north, in Norway, above the Arctic Circle, on the Kola Peninsula, in Murman region, Murmansk in Arkhangelsk region, and with his Arctic paintings, putting these together with this northern quality in the pavilion. So it's pretty well documented, this work, and it's starting a kind of northern vocabulary, 1896, that will be taken up more importantly later. And some of his paintings have survived, like these. They're big as well, and they get moved after, they haven't been lost. They're showing the northern lights, and that kind of synthesis, the flattening of form and the ambiguous space, ambiguous recession, that's an Art Nouveau quality in some respects. It's a modern kind of trait. One could say it comes from the Orient too. But it's this ambiguous space, and the plane, the frontal plane, you know, as if they're just put on that plane. It's part of his almost the drama of the North that Korovin is expressing here. And this gets incorporated into a railway station later, which I've got on the PowerPoint today. This is Hammerfest, and the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, incredible, powerful sort of lights in the sky effects that are kind of an essential quality that I think Art Nouveau could have played with more, but it does in some respects when it is northern. Then it comes to Paris, this northern language. And so we're moving below the 55th line of latitude. I don't know what Paris is on, actually. Do you know what line we're on here? 40-something? Anyway, and Meltzer, Roman Meltzer, who's of Swiss origins, actually, designs the Russian pavilions looking like Kremlins from different parts of Russia, not just Moscow. There may be Kazan here, I think, and borrowing from their towers, their forms. And it's virtually where we are today. Those Russian pavilions are just by the Trocadero there. I tried to turn the map so that we can see it. And it was huge, the Russian section. And it was quite varied. So for me, it wasn't quite as exciting as Nizhny Novgorod, actually, because that was huge, just for all kinds of varieties of Russian stuff. And this is a little bit more, you know, state-controlled, I would say. But still they are stressing their expansion, they're expressing their, their empire, and they're looking at their regions, the reach, Ukraine, of Russia. And so there is this pavilion of the Trans-Siberian here. And the model still survives of the Krasnoyarsk, this truss bridge. That won the Grand Prix, the gold medal and the Grand Prix of the 1900 World Exhibition that I think Gustav Eiffel had won in 1889. So Proskuryakov's design is hugely important, and it's 144 meters across the river at Krasnoyarsk. The Yenisei River, here it is. Now, for those pavilions, stressing this empire, Central Asia, Siberia, and the North. Carovin, assisted by Nikolai Claude von Jürgensberg, who was a German of German birth working in the Russian, of course, many Germans lived within the Russian Empire. They create these friezes for the pavilions that we've just seen, and they stress that northern quality. And again, they've survived. So we've got them, mainly in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, and some in the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg, some of the sketches in one place. I think, I haven't put where, there's 28 of these anyway. And they show different sides of this colonization of the North. So you get these trading stations, the ships, and this sense of modern shipping, modern exploration, moving into these very inhospitable to man locations, expressed in these very simple and yet striking, huge panels. Absolutely massive. I can't, 4 meters each, I think, wide, maybe more. And the sense of structure, the sense of simple nature, the flattening of form, the use of line to delineate it is going to be an Art Nouveau quality, and Karovin's expressing it here. And he shows the Nenets, the Samoyeds with their reindeer, and their traditions, their pagan traditions in this pavilion. So it's worth finding. They faded over time, the panels of the North that were shown in Paris. But you can still get a sense of them, and I think that's important for the idiom of Art Nouveau, actually. Some of them are slightly more southern, sort of sunny quality to them. But this almost reminds me of Maurice Denis technique, the way you have the screen of trees in Maurice Denis and other Nabi work, actually. Karovin lived in Paris a long time, and he would have been well acquainted with the modern trends in Paris. He also designed the pavilion that is, again, together with an architect, Ilya Bondarenko, that was dedicated to the applied arts. And this, in Paris, and this employed a mixture of timber architecture from the north. This showed wooden terem and chorom, kind of wooden mansions of Russia, looking back to 18th century, and maybe even earlier, 17th century, timber designs, these huge wooden houses of the wealthy in Russia of that period. And so he's modernizing them in Paris, for Paris in 1900. And again, we see some things that we've already seen in Nizhny Novgorod when we look at the interior. And here you can see photographs have survived of this. Yeah, you might get a sense of Viking Norse design in this, and also the rough, crude carving, as if it's a profiled form of a head or a dragon. That comes across, that blending of traditions, East and West, Northern Europe, is very well expressed in this pavilion of the applied arts in Paris in 1900. Inside too, because of course there were new art colonies, artist colonies springing up across European Russia. Talashkino was one, run by Maria Tenesheva, Princess Maria Tenesheva, and also Abramtsova was another, closer to Moscow. Abramtsova run by Sava Mamontov, who was a railway industrialist, actually, and a merchant. And both of them were great patrons of the Art Nouveau artists of the period. So Tenesheva and Mamontov should not be forgotten for pushing on the Art Nouveau language of the North. So we get their recourse or their return to the craft traditions that were being overrun by industrial trends, mass manufactured metal industries, heavy metal, etc., had made these sort of wooden crafts almost redundant, and these patrons tried to revive them and give the villages a raison d'être for their modern life. And Talashkino and Abramsova do that, and others too. And so they get their interiors here. And maybe we could see these forms, the curvaceous forms, cruder, heavier, possibly, a little bit more like strawberries or these volutes than we're used to, but nevertheless they have this connection with the Art Nouveau curvilinearity, I think. And we can see a new kind of window form. The aperture is changing too. That's expressed by Korovin on his pavilion. So he's not just using the quadrangular form, he is moving to semicircular or polygonal forms and breaking them up in new ways, you know, so that's quite experimental. And the artwork shown very often is from workshops run by two women. Women had a prime place in the development of Art Nouveau as far as Russia was concerned. Yelena Palyanova and Maria Yakonchikova. Yakonchikova's dresser here is shown, and she is not only designing it and getting it made, but she's also running an embroidery workshop, which incorporates new designs as well. So textile art is being pushed forward through recourse to craft traditions and the embroidery traditions that are so fine in Eastern Europe, but they're being moved forward and westernized in some respects. And we see that in these old photographs. Okay. That's a close-up of Yakonchikova's dresser with some of the different forms. Vrubel. Mikhail Vrubel. He's the Klimt of Russia. The only Klimt. Well, one of the 3 or 4 Klimts of Russia. But Mikhail Vrubel is incredibly important. And he's an unbelievable synthesizer of traditions. He's working in different media. He's married to an opera singer. He's thinking about Faust. He is going crazy as well, becoming, you know, he ends his life in a mental asylum outside St. Petersburg. But he's running the ceramics atelier, the ceramics workshop at this Abramsova artist colony that Mamontov had set up outside Moscow on his estate. And while he's running that, he's trained as a lawyer as well, and he's trained as a fine artist, a painter, and he's really an incredibly impressive painter. But he's running this ceramics workshop, and he's experimenting with maiolica, all different forms. And the quintessential product of Vrubel that is shown really in Paris in 1900 is the Mikulia Selyaninovich and a Volga Varangian fireplace. So together with the Syrian and Alkonost birds, which are the birds of joy and sorrow in Russian tradition. So and they're very often found in wooden form in barge boards over the entrances of wooden cottages, timber cottages across Russia, actually carved just by the house owner possibly. So he's put that in ceramics, and he's combined these two figures. This is the coming together of Scandinavia and Byzantium, really. And it's incredibly Art Nouveau in some respects. And yet some people will say, oh, it's not light enough to be Art Nouveau. I showed, when I was coming here, I experimented with this PowerPoint on my old aunt. And And she said, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. I can't understand that. I can't even read it, she said to me. And it is difficult to read in a way. And I understood her. And it is, you know, they're heavy figures in some respects, and you have to work them out with their surroundings. But you have got Mikula, who is the Russian plowman, rooted to the ground, and you've got this invader, Volga the Varangian, the Viking, coming in on his big, heavy horse and bringing his form of civilization to the Russian folk. And they're meeting over the fireplace, which is quite a nice thing, you know, over the hearth. And so it's not just a meeting that is going to end in conflict, actually. It is going to be resolved. And it is going to be resolved in the arts in 1900 in big ways. So the Russian Klimt #1, Vrubel, he does it, and then #2, Röhrig does it, and maybe Korov in #3, Klimt also does it. So it's a big, big thing for Russian Art Nouveau and Northern Art Nouveau, this bringing together of, you know, Greek Byzantine traditions and Northern Nordic traditions, Slav traditions too. And you can see the Slav traditions in the way, the double arch of the hearth too, this kind of with the pendulum in the center there. All right, so that was shown in Paris. Yakunchikova, whose dresser was just here, next to Vrubel's fireplace, she lived in this house. So it is a great example, still there today in Moscow, of Art Nouveau. It could almost be Joseph Hoffmann or Otto Wagner in some respects. And there is definitely a relationship going on. So that Yakunchikova, who's looked to the past and modernized the past, including embroidery, in her designs for Paris, is living in this incredibly modern building together with her husband. And you can see, you know, the flat, the roof, the cantilevered gable, the vast glass windows, allowing her to have a space for a studio as well. So it's multifunctional, and it's form following function, largely. And the curvilinearity, too, in the railings. So it's not just cuboid, but it's fluid, motion, simple. It's great. Also in Moscow, this is a little excursion to Moscow before we go to St. Petersburg, because Klimt #1 in Russia, Vrubel, for Nizhny Novgorod had designed 2 panels. And he had had his own pavilion created for him by Mamontov, and to display these huge panels. We've only got the sketches, or maybe the original panels survived of the Princess Lointain. That's Edmond Rostand, actually, so it's French connection there. And that gets incorporated in Majolica, I think it's Majolica, onto the front of William Walcott's Hotel Metropole, which he designs with Kekushev. In fact, I missed out that Walcott is English. He's an English architect working in Moscow in Art Nouveau style. So again, quite an international arena that Moscow and St. Petersburg were. So the flattened form, in a way, we get the international and the national being represented here. So that sense of the Mikula and Volga that we've seen in the fireplace, that is the kind of more eastern and northern side, and more earthy side, meeting the more idyllic, romantic, floating, ethereal side, the universal side, the dream side, or the light dreams. This is also a dream, of course, of Princess Lointain. When I first went to Russia in 1981, that was where I stayed, actually, and I was astonished at it. I couldn't believe it. It's right next to Red Square, actually. The other side to this, while we're still in Paris, because that was a little diversion, is the Finnish pavilion in Paris. Now, it was quite rare for countries that weren't states to get pavilions. Bosnia got one as part of the Austrian section, and that's very interesting to see what Alfons Mucha did with Bosnia. And in a way, what he does there with the Bosnian pavilion is paralleled here with the Finnish pavilion, I think. So it's part of the Russian Empire. Sometimes in the Russian literature especially, and even on the outside of the pavilion, it said section Rus. But that gets eradicated because suddenly the Finns are able to express their national identity in this pavilion. And it's kind of iconic, it's become iconic. And because, again, the panels by Akseli Gallen-Kalliela have survived, or they were recreated for the National Museum in Helsinki, it's had a legacy. Now, again, I wrote about Finland at some length in this sort of textbook that I produced in the mid-90s, so I maybe don't need to dwell on it too much, but it blends ecclesiastical forms with the spire, northern forms, Finnish forms, and Art Nouveau, I think. It's Saarinen, Gazelius, and Lindgren, these key figureheads for Finnish Art Nouveau, along with Lars Sonck, probably, who's the fourth figure, I would say, in terms of architects. So they get permission from the Russian authorities for this pavilion, and they've got a certain autonomy. Finland has an autonomy, a unique level of autonomy as far as the Russian Empire was concerned. Now, Bosnia was a different question because internationally it wasn't really recognized as Austrian, I think. I mean, it was still up for debate whether it was officially Austrian. But this was officially part of the Russian Empire. So for the Tsar to do that, I mean, what happens afterwards, 1905, and a kind of period of Russification, more or less eradicates, in some respects, this burgeoning Finnish language and the exploration of ethnographic identity. But it's still being allowed, but even though the Russification process gets into full swing post the first revolution of 1905. So in the older pictures, you can see section Rus being expressed around the entrance, and you get these motifs just in relief coming out of this budding form, the budding nation of Finland, with squirrels and bears and maybe oaks and different trees, pine cones, the nature of Finland being expressed in this repetitive motifs, these pattern-like forms around, not just the entrance, around the whole pavilion. So let's move on, let's move inside. The year before the pavilion was built, a very large meteorite had had landed, exploded, fell to the ground in southern Finland near Porvoo. And so they decided that they'd saved a huge fragment of this meteorite, and they made that they put that in the place of the altar, really. So this temple of art and Finnish identity, which has an equivalence to the secession building of Josef Maria Olbrich in Vienna, has at its heart this fragment of a meteorite, which seems a bit weird, you know. But maybe that stresses the power of nature that you feel in the north. And at that moment, the meteorite was going to be examined for its minerals, etc. It was hugely significant to have got this huge block. So that is being put into this polygonal, I think it's octagonal vitrine, and it's surrounded under these arches by episodes from the Kalevala, this epic collection of poetry by Elias Lönnrot, the Finnish poet. Most of the oral traditions he collected were from Karelia, So in a way, it's Finland, or the Finns, assimilating Karelians, some of whom lived in, or felt more affinity with Russia, actually. So it's quite an interesting play on becoming Finnish, how the Finns used the Kalevala and used Karelia, and it's also interesting how they used the Sami too. But at this point, it's hugely important. And of course, Sibelius is going to be making music with the young Finns, and Akseli Gallen-Kalliela, who studied in Paris and is well aware of the modern traditions and the moving of the fine arts in Paris, will create these frescoes around the dome, if we want to call it that. And the defense of the Sampo here, Ilmarion, they're forging something in the field of vipers. So good and evil, this mysterious object that is the kind of arc of Finnish identity, the Sampo, is being defended from this evil griffin-like bird monster. And I sometimes, when I'm at the university, I compare this with Lalicque's dragonfly brooch for Sarah Bernhardt, of course, but because of the winged threat that both involved and this ambiguous creature, I think there is a relationship. I'm not sure, but anyway. The claws are quite similar. If you look at Sarah Bernhardt's, it's not really a dragonfly, is it? It's more than a dragonfly. So these are some of the stands: natural history, administration, maybe postal services, using a more fluid, streamlined, flattened vocabulary of Art Nouveau that we're used to, possibly. But simple, almost carpentry forms of Art Nouveau in wood and plaster. There was one special room in the pavilion, the Iris room. Now, the Iris company was a company of applied arts set up in Porvoo, Borga, in southern Finland, and run by a Count Louis Spare, S-P-A-R-R-E. And he had great experience in Paris. He was quite an Anglophile as well, so he understood English arts and crafts, and he felt that he could bring to Finland a kind of arts and crafts sensibility. It didn't last very long, his crafts workshops, but there is a kind of beautiful forms in their chairs and their cupboards that they produce, and in the ceramics that they produce. Willie Finch, who was an Englishman born in Belgium, actually is attracted to Finland, and he creates the ceramics for Iris and for the pavilion. So that's what you can see here. Yeah, that will do. That will do that. One of the photographs, surviving photographs, shows a rug, and the rug is by the painter who moves into different media, Akseli Gallen-Kalliela. So this is the burgeoning Finnish Art Nouveau. This pavilion in Paris kind of encapsulates. And Gallen-Kalliela, after Paris, will recreate this flame rug at least once, maybe more than once. And it's an embodiment of the modernization of Finnish traditions. This is a rug that comes down the wall, goes over a bench and onto the floor. And that was a tradition in Finnish fishermen's cottages. So he incorporated this tradition into a modern environment. And here, you know, it's behind and underneath a desk and a chair. I'm not sure. I think that there are examples in XIXe, which Gazelius, Saarinen, and Lindgren built for themselves. This beautiful kind of tripartite mansion outside of Helsinki in the countryside. And they also use these rii rugs. So this is a northern quality of Art Nouveau, and the form, the fire, the flame, abstracted, stylized, giving a sense of warmth that you need in the north, in almost a psychological way as well as in a material way. So ideal form. Now, Loie Fuller in Paris was also acting fire and orchids and all kinds of different elements. So there's an interplay with Loie Fuller's Art Nouveau language in dance too, which was captured on film and in photographs as well, as Toulouse-Lautrec also did lithographs of her, maybe as butterflies, but also fire, I think, flame. Anyway, there's definitely a connection with Loie Fuller's language. My final example of exhibitions, Glasgow, 1901. Kelvin Grove. If you've been to Glasgow, you'll hopefully know Kelvin Grove. One pavilion, the Arts Pavilion, has survived. It's by Simpson, an English architect, actually, and it's kind of red sandstone, I think. But this industrial hall by James Miller, a contemporary of, a Scottish contemporary of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, didn't survive, like so many pavilions for these big exhibitions, unfortunately. But what we see in Glasgow is the burgeoning Mackintosh style. And Charles Rennie Mackintosh is graduating from the Glasgow School of Art. He's married now to his student love, Margaret MacDonald, and they're going to be creating their own flat. They're going to be creating interiors, tea rooms, etc. Together, really. It's a collaboration. I better get a drink. His design was too radical, too simple, too modern. So that's why they went with James Miller, maybe. I don't know. Mackintosh wasn't very lucky with his Glasgow commissions on the whole. But nevertheless, he survives as an architect. He's working for Honeyman and Kepi partnership, and he's joining that partnership. And yeah, he gets to make some big commissions, but just not enough, really. We get a sense of the relationship with Vienna. Here, he's in communication with Vienna. If not Otto Wagner, certainly with Joseph Hoffmann, Wagner's student. So, and I think Hoffmann was sent to Glasgow to look at this. I need to check my notes on that. I'm pretty sure he went to Glasgow around this time. So he was talking directly with Mackintosh, and Vienna was going to be influenced by Glasgow, and maybe Glasgow was going to be influenced by Vienna. I think these things are always two-way, actually. I'd never like to say one is moving in a primary way. On the PowerPoint, you will see a few links. Now, I can't link to them today to show you what's behind them. So if you want to take a note of them, that might be good, because some good work has been done, particularly by my colleague Pamela Robertson at Glasgow University, Professor Pamela Robertson, who's retired now. She, for years, worked on producing this incredible database of Mackintosh drawings, photographs, plans, literature. Everything is now there on the website. So anything you want on Mackintosh, really, including reviews, contemporary reviews, is to be found on Pamela Robertson's, Glasgow University's website. So I can't take you to that to show you what else is there, you know, photographs or plans, but I do recommend it. When I showed this to my aunt last week, she said, "Oh, it's smiling face. It's very pleasant." I hadn't thought of that, but maybe she's right. I don't know what you think. We might talk about that later. There is also a Japanese quality to it, the lightness, an atectonic quality, the use of these straight lines and then the canopied kind of turrets. Yeah, He's very sensitive with his line and his tectonic qualities. All he gets to design is are 4 little stands for different businesses, essentially. One is for the Glasgow School of Art, and that's on the right. One is for the cabinet maker Francis Smith, this looping form, more curvilinearity than this rectilinear box that he loves, actually. And again, I think he's appropriating and extrapolating from Japanese traditions here. But of course, these are lost now. We've only got these old photographs. Actually published, a lot of them published either in the London journal The Studio or in the German journal Deutsche Kunst und Dekoration. That produced more, I would say, Glasgow art than even The Studio. The Studio was pretty good for Glasgow coverage, but the Scottish periodicals and the other periodicals in Britain, it was virtually non-existent. Studio and Deutsche Kunst und Dekoration, that's the best places to go to see it. So these two are actually from a mixture of those that I've just mentioned, hence the different languages on the captions. A modern kind of patron, camera manufacturer here, and also a department store. So Macintosh working for these new kind of commercial enterprises in Glasgow. Not just Glasgow, beyond as well. This is the lace section. But the biggest draw of the whole of Glasgow was the north, again. Okay, we might say Glasgow is the north, but, and it is in some respects, but the Russians poured money into this, more maybe than they did, well, no, I don't want to, I better not say that. They certainly put a huge, I haven't got the figures in my head, but they invested more than any other nation in the Glasgow International Exhibition of 1904, very big pavilions. Designed by Fyodor Szechtel, the Art Nouveau, almost the Josef Hoffmann or the Otto Wagner of Moscow, really, Szechtel, of German origins, German community in Russia. So he's creating these pavilions showing off different Russian agriculture, forestry, in industry, in a kind of neo-romantic form. Also light, though. There's a light wooden timber quality, harking back, but moving forward. So that's the cover to the small booklet that was produced to coincide with the exhibition. Here you can see his name. Even his name, with the H's and the E's, used the Macintosh-style double bar. So that relationship is being stressed here in these northern, these Russian pavilions in Glasgow in 1901. I'll just flick through these. The mining pavilion, of course, exploration, using these new mineral resources, raw materials, why not, and to exploit them and develop them and export them, make money from them. So I won't go into the horseshoe arches and the spires, etc. You can see them and the flattened decoration. Yeah. We don't know if Szechtel actually met Macintosh one-to-one. We haven't got evidence of that, but I suspect they met. The wood industries pavilion and the view of the 4 pavilions here in Paris. But immediately, well, not quite immediately after the 1901 exhibition in Glasgow, Macintosh goes, at least, if not in person, in his art, to Russia. And he creates interiors there for the new style. In fact, Art Nouveau in the Russian Empire, whether that was in Finland or across Russia, was known either as the modern style or the new style. Not really, it was rarely specified as Art Nouveau. That was further west that the term was used. So Mackintosh, with his high back chairs and these elongated backs tapering at the top. Sometimes they will, of course, be ladder back chairs for Glasgow. Here, and his streamlined cabinets opening up, almost like a Japanese kimono or something like that, that quality with their wings. And they're angelic spirits, and he will paint them very often white. And he's taking that language to Moscow now as well. And Szechtel copies him or works almost in the same language too. At the Yaroslavl railway station, which I was at in January, actually, I was looking closely at it and I couldn't stop myself thinking again of the relationship with Mackintosh that is expressed there. So this is the old photograph of it, nice to have it in French. And the idea of this railway station is that it will go to the north. It will go up to Archangelsk, to Archangel, and open up for all kinds of exploitation, I suppose, those territories of the far north. And then things to be exported out by ship from Archangel too. That's how it looks now. It's in very good condition. It's a well listed, it's a listed preserved monument. But it's Moscow looking north. So even though Moscow is within that band of 55 to 60, it's looking north and it's looking west. So the language might be, stylized pine cones, triangles, northern fortresses, and this, but they're blended with triangles and squares that make squares. 9 little squares making a bigger square, which is the idiom of Mackintosh and Wagner and Hoffmann and Ulbrich very often. So here we find it reflected in Moscow. In ceramics, also reindeer and bears in relief around some of these supports. Stylized fruit, I'm not quite sure what these are. And aquatic, the fisheries, of course, of the north were important, and the rivers of Russia, and so they get stylized here, the rivers and the natural life. And sometimes it's more abstract than that, so while those are abstracted natural forms, the ceramics can just give a glow, a glint, an iridescence that sort of shimmers, giving a sense of it being water or sky, and yet it's a solid, it's a solid thing. And so that play is quite Art Nouveau to my mind, with the little fish, which Karovin designed, actually. Yeah, and Karovin designs, his panels are of the north, are in Moscow, in the Yaroslavl railway. They were in the Yaroslavl railway station. Now they're in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Not usually on show, because they're too big and they're susceptible, so they're not in very good condition, I think. So some of those that were in Nizhny Novgorod went to the station after the show and now are in the vaults of the Tretyakov Gallery. And you can see those northern whaling scenes, catching the whales and using the whale or for all kinds of food, for oil, etc., is being expressed here, as well as the reindeer. It's sad in a way that it's no longer there. But you do get a sense of the rationalist architecture that has this cloak of northern dreamscape, I would suggest, around it. Well, I want to finish with exhibitions, and you're probably relieved about that. And in a way, I'd already finished with it, but move just through a few examples to St. Petersburg. I wrote all these things down. St. Petersburg is incredible. As I mentioned, it has 1,614 Art Nouveau buildings, which varies according to your source. But they are incredibly varied in terms of what they do, those buildings, and how they do it, and how they speak. So we can read them in a whole variety of ways. A way that I would say is Art Nouveau, but that's up for debate. Now, it is about modern being in this cosmopolitan capital of the Russian Empire, this capital that shouldn't be there. I've been saying that for 40 years of being there, and very often. But it really kind of defies nature. You know, it's built on a marsh, on a frog, an infested, you know, swamp, really, where you get ill from drinking the water, and it just shouldn't exist. But it's a vision. It's a kind of imagined vision of Peter the Great, and because it's that modern vision, 1703, by 1903, 200 years later, it's got something to celebrate its modernity, and that modernity blends being northern with being international. It's always been regarded as the window on the west, St. Petersburg, but it's more than that, and it is the place that I've done most research, so that's why I've put all these things on there. Now, yeah, I won't say all those things out loud, but I was walking around various parts of St. Petersburg in January, and I came to the Badaev tenement house. And I thought, well, I've never really included that in my discussions, my thoughts before. So I focused on it for quite a while I was there. And so this is my first showing of my interpretation of the Badaev tenement. There's been very little literature. The literature on St. Petersburg Art Nouveau is virtually all, the good stuff anyway, is virtually all in Russian, and it's by Boris Kirikov. Now, Kirikov is the Art Nouveau specialist of St. Petersburg. He is superb, and he still uses a typewriter, and he doesn't use a computer, so I love him for that. Now, the Badaev tenement is massive. I'm only going to show you the street facades. It's on a corner. It's irregular, the plan, and it goes back. I don't know how many houses are there. It's the Badaev construction company building it as, of course, tenements are going to be going up like crazy at this time in many cities. St. Petersburg is no exception to that. So it has its great fair share of Art Nouveau tenements, and that's why I'm showing you 3 of them today. I think 3. And they're mixed function, as they are. I think you'll have examples in your exhibition of Wagner, of the Linke Wiensaal, you know, the Majolika house there, the 2 houses there. They're mixed function, you know, shops, retail premises, maybe offices above on the lower floors, and then flats above. High blocks, you know, I think in Vienna maybe 6, 7 stories, I can't remember. Likewise here, 5, maybe with an attic story, but the ground floor definitely given over to shops, retail, offices, etc. So dual function at least. And I think the Kosyakov brothers, they're 2 brothers building this, they're well aware of this, which I'm not well aware of. So the Hotel Élysée Palace, is it still there? I think it is, but I think its angel has gone. When I was looking this up, I thought I saw an advert for a bank up there instead of, is that right? Oh dear. Can we bring back the angel, please? Yeah, so that's why I chose an old postcard, really, because I think the Kosyakovs must have known this. It just seems the language is close. but it's been restored recently. So that's why it really attracted my eye in January. I thought, wow, that's looking fresh since the last time I was around this part of St. Petersburg. And it is vibrant, and it's polychromatic, and it's got the roses, it's got all kinds of different nature stressed in different ways, different forms, large scale, small scale, outside, on railings, above semicircular windows, together with owls and other forms of natural life, flora and fauna, and swags as well. So sunflowers too, quite simple, streamlined. Oh, with the addition of a little Russian fortuchka there, the little window within the window, which allows the fresh air in through the double glazing, very important Russian aspect there. And inside, a few details, a bit worse for wear, but some ceramic tiles, you know, a princess of a kind on a horse, and the ironwork of the balustrade. Roses, geometric, squared, circle motifs. That's one form of Art Nouveau in a tenement, the kind of dreamlike, floral-like forms. Another form is the more Nordic or northern romantic form, the heavier, we are grounded form of northern Art Nouveau that you find in St. Petersburg. And that comes across in a building which I have included before in talks, the Rossiya Insurance Company tenement building. And there are different examples of these Rossiya buildings around. There's one in Moscow, there's one still in Riga, actually, in Latvia, by Proskurin, I think, the architect there. This now it's no longer a tenement. It was, again, mixed function, but now it's given over mainly to the Center for Russian photographic history. And they have very good exhibitions there, actually. So if you look up Rosphoto, you might find some interesting interior shots there. Gimpel and Ilyashev are the architects. It's 1905 to 7, and it's Röhrig is the artist. And he's producing these, he's trained actually also as an archaeologist, Röhrig, and he's been to the far north exploring, as had Kandinsky, actually, and there is a connection with Kandinsky in the north, I think, even though he goes to Bavaria. So Röhrig and Kandinsky, and their formal language can be seen as one, as almost hermetic, I think. Röhrig doesn't go as abstract, but he abstracts, nevertheless. So that's clear here. We get the rough rubble, the heavy stone, the use of very often finished granite around the tower, and these heavy kind of finials over it. Let me see if I can take you inside too. Lots of snow in the panels. Men on horses, knights on horses, which is another Kandinsky quality, of course. So that's also being expressed here in Röhrig's frieze. And it's, again, these have been restored fairly recently, so they're in good condition. This is on Balshaya Morskaya Street in St. Petersburg, a very elegant part of the city. It's actually where my flat is too, if anyone wants to rent it. It's a perfect place to be expressing this new kind of northernness. And it's quite close to the Fabergé building too. And the Fabergé uses a different form of Art Nouveau. It's worth comparing the two. But I didn't do that in the PowerPoint. So reindeer herders, knights in armor shooting their bows and arrows, northern fortresses. And inside, you go into this sort of mythical north, in stained glass, in plasterwork, in metalwork. What else? Maybe, no, maybe that's it. In ceramics too, in the stoves. It's not, that's the exception really, these birds, these elegant, they may be peacocks, I suppose. That's the only non-northern thing I found there. You know, a sea lion or whatever it is, above the main foyer's arch. And then the plasterwork almost feeling like icebergs. And it's white. It's incredibly hard to take a photograph in this Ross photo place, because if you take it with flash, it always, the white, you know, flashes in the wrong place. It's incredibly hard. I've never got it right. And I'm not sure about this bird. To me, it looks like a penguin, but I think a penguin is from the Antarctic, so that might not be very Arctic. So maybe that's a nice synthesis too, north and south here. And probably this kind of northern tribal person, possibly a Nenets, being represented here, a reindeer herder, and the pine trees, or the young birch trees also in some of the very, almost excessively heavy relief work of the plaster that adorns the staircase from bottom to top. Reindeers, canoes, suns, ferns, knights, castles, and more stylized, maybe almost like snowflakes or something, I don't know. But that's more recognizably Art Nouveau, I guess. Aquatic forms moving in the ceramics. Some of the ceramics was made in Finland by Finnish masters, by the way. Some of it was made in St. Petersburg. So there's a mixture here. The stoves, definitely, I think, were made in Finland. A great Finnish tradition of ceramic tile stoves. And the stoves change, too. Sometimes they're heavy, sometimes they're light. Sometimes they have funny faces. Sometimes they have Scottish thistles, definitely Scottish. And I don't know what these plants are. And of course, you can lie on the stoves. That's the beautiful thing about some Russian stoves. You know, you get warm on them. So you can put your head against that grotesque and feel its teeth. This is another website. If we'd had a link, I might have been able to show you. But I do recommend citywalls.ru website. That is an incredible result. Unfortunately, well, I use it in Russian. And I'm not sure if it has any other language, but it has gone to town visually on the styles and the buildings of all kinds of different kinds in St. Petersburg. So citywalls.ru is the place. And those particular, you can look at the map, you can actually go on styles, and there's a drop-down menu, and if you click on modern, if you know Cyrillic, it says modern, click on that, that is the Art Nouveau section. It doesn't mean modern beyond Art Nouveau. It means the architecture that is Art Nouveau between about 1895 and 1915, I guess. So I'm not going to show you the Eliseev shop. That's on Nevsky Prospect, a fantastic shop. Go there if you can. Buy your chocolates there, buy your caviar, and maybe a little bit of cheese. And you'll be in an Art Nouveau emporium. It's fantastic. By Baranovsky, the architect, Gabriel Baranovsky. Karl May Gymnasium, the secondary school, where many of the Art Nouveau architects and artists trained. It was a German language school, actually. That's on Vasilevsky Ostrov, St. Basil's Island, and that was a beautiful school in its own right. And it's still, well, it's partly functioning, it's partly a museum now, but having a look at that online is well worth it. And the Orthopaedic Institute I have included a little bit, because that is an equivalent to Wagner's Steinhof, really. The Viennese, with the St. Leopold's Church, Am Steinhof, the psychiatric hospital, Meltzer's Orthopaedic Institute and hospital is the equivalent. And there's a remarkable architectural language relationship between the two, I think, which hasn't properly been brought out. Added to this is a bit like the Yeliseyev department store, the Singer sewing machine headquarters. It's also a variety of functions in there. There was a bank in there on the ground floor. In some respects, this reminds me of Wagner's Post Office Savings Bank in its modernity, not on its, particularly its facades, but in the way it has a steel framework, a lot of plate glass ceilings inside, uses lifts, actually Otis lifts here. It's very functionalist, but it's draped in this curvilinear, very kind of in-your-face language. And it's selling sewing machines, American sewing machines of Singer. And it does so. It's on Nevsky Prospect, which is the main artery of St. Petersburg, running from the Admiralty to the bend of the River Neva near the Alexander Nevsky Monastery or Lavra. So this is the plan, and you can see this horseshoe window with inside. Today it's the House of Books, Dom Knigi. So you can visit it, you can see most of the interiors. Sometimes they have exhibitions up in the globe and the space below the globe, well worth a visit. So I'll just quickly run you through that. These figures, there are 3 pairs of them actually, on the corner and on the 2 different facades. That would be, I don't know, maybe the east and the west facades. They are remarkable figures because they remind me of the acroteria on the Post Office Savings Bank in Vienna. But this is Suzor. Actually, he's French. Paul Suzor. Yeah, he's a count. He's French. You're to blame for this. Yeah, no, he's a really good architect. And I think probably his father had emigrated to Russia, maybe his grandfather, but they were certainly of aristocratic lineage. And so when they arrived, I'm not sure. But this is his masterpiece. And so this, on the one hand, stresses northern St. Petersburg maritime aspect. On the other hand, it's stressing we're selling sewing machines. These are geniuses. They are Valkyrie and they're winged. I called my title the wingspan of Art Nouveau in the North. And so they're winged beauties. And one is more masculine than the other. One is on the right. I think the more feminine one is doing the sewing and has got the spindle with the bobbin. And the one on the left has got a spear. So 2 sides. And, of course, they play with the rostral columns that are outside the stock exchange, the Bourse, in central St. Petersburg. Inside, you go up a grand staircase, if you want, several staircases, or a sort of transactions hall with glass ceiling, too. And you can go, well, you can't always go up to the dome, but there are sometimes the exhibitions in this space, in the lantern, really, above this, which glowed. And it's using these steel frameworks. It's developed from Shukhov, really. This ability to use engineering, modern engineering, to create this structure. And so when it lights up at night, it's particularly effective. I wanted also to briefly talk about bridges, and I might need to refer to my notes for a moment, because I don't normally talk about bridges. But I thought it was worth it because, first of all, I mentioned that the bridge at Krasnoyarsk had won the Grand Prix in Paris 1900. There was a big treaty between France and Russia, maybe 1893, 1895, something like that. And so there was this coming together of the states and new collaboration in all spheres, I would say. And engineering, architecture was just one of them, as well as the arts. The bridges represent this relationship very well as having an Art Nouveau idiom. So the Trinity Bridge, very important, going to the northern Petrograd side, away from the Field of Mars and the Suvorov Square of central St. Petersburg, going north, spanning this vast river, the River Neva, is designed here in Paris, and it is a French bridge. It's bascule. It also opens up. I think I put enough details there for you to see and not have to suffer me pronouncing them. So actually, Gustave Eiffel, or Eiffel, he won first prize in the competition for this bridge, but his bridge didn't get built. This one got built instead of Eiffel, which is interesting. I think Patouillat also designed the École des Beaux-Arts in Nancy. Interesting. I don't know whether that was first or second, before this or after, I'm not sure. But anyway, particularly interesting here for me are the lamps and where the spans meet. They have this sort of fluid Art Nouveau language. The next bridge that I went over recently, and I thought I've got to include this today. Oh, right. Yeah, it's the Peter the Great Bridge going to the Ochte suburb. Now, this is slightly later, and it's built upon that French collaboration. And in a way, it's sort of a culmination of Art Nouveau, I would say. And it's engineering, architectural synthesis. It wins prizes for its architectural finesse, I should say. So it has an incredible span, 334 meters, and it has a drawbridge. And it combines the modern and the ancient in one. It reminds me a bit of Tower Bridge in London in that. So I think they've built on the Tower Bridge, which of course was a little bit earlier, and a very beautiful bridge at that, also rising in the middle. But that's a pretty full shot of it. If I show you it closer up, a few details, you begin to see a relationship to the fittings, the furnishing that you might see in Vienna, actually, on this bridge. They're wonderful. And it combines with this stone work in the middle. So. Then I was going to mention the Orthopaedic Institute of Meltzer. I won't dwell on this, I've said it already. It needs to be compared with the Steinhof in Vienna. I have compared that in an article. If any of you do want, well, I didn't compare it, I wrote about this in an article. So, and I don't know if anyone else has. So by all means, get in touch and I can let you have that article where I tried to break down its language. So it's a huge building, very modern, nursing and medical facilities, and it uses this streamlined, very plain Art Nouveau language. Sometimes they're opened up entirely, the places where the patients will recuperate. No, it's fine. I won't dwell on that, except I wanted to show you the church that it includes, which for me is like the St. Leopold's Church. Except while that's a Greek cross and stands on its own, this is incorporated into the structure more. But also it modernizes. This has flat roofs, a certain geometry that is not that of the ancient, of the Greek traditions. And you can see how it's combining with the modern traditions too. And it incorporates a ceramic icon by Kuzma Petrovodkin, rather Vroubel-esque. He might be Klimt number 4, actually, of the North, but Petrovodkin comes a bit, and in a way he's a Matisse too. But that is a beautiful facade where you see the church with Petrovodkin's mural, produced in Britain, actually, Roald Dahl. So. Okay, I'm going to briefly, I have no more time and no more voice. I'm going to have a glass of water. I'm going to take you quickly to Glasgow. There's so much less in Glasgow than there is in St. Petersburg, and as there was in Paris in 1900, really. So we'll zoom through Glasgow. There is a huge relationship with Vienna, I've already mentioned that. So Mackintosh works for Viennese patrons. He's in touch with Hoffmann in particular. And this is his music salon for Fritz Wondorfer. That's the Mackintosh links that I would recommend having. I mentioned it already, coming out of Glasgow University. Those structures, in particular those buildings, or music salon's not a building, but are well worth having a look at online. Mackintosh does have this connection with the continent of Europe, and particularly the German-speaking parts of Europe. Also a bit with Brussels, with Belgium. I don't know about Paris, I don't know about France so much, but he certainly went to Belgium when he was younger. So maybe there's a relationship with Victor Otto or Van der Velde there, I'm not sure. Anyway, him and his wife, Margaret, produce really these interiors together. She does the friezes or the murals, the gesso panels, for the installation at Vienna in 1900, and then that is now, you can see it probably in Kelvin Grove, and you can also see her, or you could see her, her work in some of the houses and the tea rooms designed by Mackintosh. Now, he's well known for these high back chairs, which are incredibly uncomfortable to sit on. And sometimes they give you a halo. Sometimes they look like they're a swallow above your head. And sometimes they're turned into Mockintosh. And they mock you because you drink out of them in a horrible, ugly mug, as the tourist kind of passion for Mackintosh takes off. So I didn't know which photograph was better to show you them, but anyway, he likes white and he likes the contrast of it's monochrome very often, but sometimes black and white, black playing against white, and then little details picked out in color, strong color sometimes, in glass or ceramics or gesso. Again, playing with folk pagan traditions, flattening the female form, making it spiritual, giving it a sense of angelic, non-material quality, but now a refined, aestheticized environment to live in, to work in, to pray in, or whatever, to learn in. It's a whole kind of almost tyranny of design in some respects. It's almost too pure, and you feel that being human is a bit too kind of material to be here. When you visit the Mackintosh flat, which you can do because it's part of the Hunterian Art Gallery of Glasgow University today, you almost feel you need to tread on tiptoes because it's so delicate, and of course the curators try to get you to tread on tiptoes anyway. But it's amazing. There's some shots of the Willow Tea Room on Sauchiehall Street in central Glasgow, some of the ladder-back chairs that he designed there, and the doors with this kind of pagan cross for the room deluxe, the kind of elite room, and the rose and the willow, the catkins stylized to almost total abstraction, but I think there's still willow, weeping willow motifs dripping down from this cross cruciform pattern on the doors. And his famous Helensburgh house, known as Hill House for the publisher Walter Blackie, which is now part of the National Trust, actually. And you can have the delight of seeing it enclosed within a glass box now, which is rather controversial, I should say, because it was deteriorating with time. So they put a big glass box around it. But anyway, it's a typical patron, a publisher, living in a sort of commutable distance out in the countryside at Helensburgh, down the Clyde River from Glasgow. So a beautiful country house overlooking the river from on high up the hill, and blending, you know, sort of a 360-degree vision of the house. So there's no front and back and no sides, really. You go in, and the main entrance is in quite a modest little side entrance, if anything. This has the nice sort of perspective looking out towards the river, that's true, but incorporating traditional motifs from Scottish baronial architecture, the battered chimney, the render, the tower house forms, but also a Japanese quality again, in these lattice-like, light lattice-like forms. So heavy and light combining, dark and light, all within one building. And this very sad building, which I used to take my students to every year, the Glasgow School of Art, destroyed twice by fire. And the last time, 2 years ago, on graduation day, destroyed. And I don't think they can rebuild it now. And it was, in my opinion, probably the masterpiece of Northern Art Nouveau, actually. Maybe together with Meltzer's Orthopaedic Institute. But this was just sublime. And it blends the modern, the functional with the irrational, with the ironwork, with the glass, with the stonework, with local stonework. It was a masterpiece, and it was just unique. The director's room and studio there, Fra Newbury, this visionary English painter, actually, who got the design curriculum on board, understood from his painting background and his background at the South Kensington Museum, the V&A, and school there. He understood the relationship of the fine to the applied arts, and that's why Glasgow and Mackintosh really had a chance around 1900 to be a driving force for Art Nouveau. And it's a shame that the patronage wasn't there, because the vision was there. Just these little bits of patronage have left us with something, at least. The library was a masterpiece, the entrance, the studios. What has survived is the Scotland Street School, and that is a minor masterpiece too. Again, I take my students there. It's a museum. Lots of people don't go because it's a little bit out of the centre, and it's a rather bland museum of education, but it's beautiful, and I think it's sublime, and it encapsulates Mackintosh's Art Nouveau idiom very well in this schooling way. He uses medieval traditions with the twin conical towers there. He's borrowed them from a palace in Fife, probably, but he's opened up them with the glazing, and there's huge stairwells, one for boys, one for girls. And the central entrance, which you can't see, was for infants, actually. Here's the girls. And he would put into the windows just this little, almost like it's I don't know, it's a petal, it's a flower of some form. It doesn't need to be the whole thing. So there's a feeling of transparency here, of grid form, just illuminated a little bit by this sense of color light, which is tremendous. How you can do it with such a small thing. So that one is, you can just make out where they are, possibly, in the stairwell. Quickly moving on. He didn't get his choice of color. Again, with budget restrictions, he didn't always, wasn't, so it went more white. Like in the Glasgow School of Art, he wanted it to be a growth from darkness to light. But they economized and white tiles were cheaper, so there's too much white, just fringed with green on the ground floor, which was the drill hall, actually. We used to do drill. Did you do drill in France as well? The children had to do drill every morning, you know, to learn to be good citizens. And this is the drill hall. Anyway, that was that. There were a few more examples, but I'm only going to show these. I'm not really going to talk about them. There isn't much in between Glasgow and St. Petersburg. I've mentioned Riga. It's fantastic. Helsinki is like Riga in some respects. Tallinn has less. It's good, and there is some. Stockholm doesn't really have much. Copenhagen likewise. There are a few examples, and that's why I'm glossing over them. Helsinki is worth a visit. You can feel a rugged northern, sometimes in insurance buildings, sometimes in the museums. Different kinds of banks, art centers. There are Art Nouveau buildings in Helsinki. But they use the same kind of idiom that we've seen in St. Petersburg and in the exhibitions in from Nizhny Novgorod to Paris to Glasgow before. So I had a student writing about for her PhD on the Art Nouveau schools of Sweden. And so she identified particularly the Norra Latin, which was an older building, a historicist, almost neo-Renaissance building of 1860s, 70s. But the central atrium was given these murals, and they rise up, a bit like I was saying. Mackintosh wanted this rising up through darkness to light, stressing a national identity and a universal identity, really. And it's a boys' school, the Norra Latin. So you rise up to the migrating swans. And the swans with their massive wingspan is a kind of nice way to draw to a close with this talk, I think. I've been talking about wingspan. And that's very symbolic for Sweden. The swans, especially the boys, they threw up their caps when they graduated from school, and they became like free swans. Beautiful swans that could migrate and spread their education and their vision around. There's one more example on the PowerPoint from Sweden, and this is Norrköping, that Rachel Shepard, my PhD student, many years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, wrote this PhD. And she identified Carl Bergsten as the Swedish Mackintosh for me. And she produced maybe one article on Bergsten and Mackintosh in our university journal, I think, and gave up art history after that, which is a bit of a shame. But this school, St. Olaf's in Norrköping, she went to town with, and she really was able to show how it resonates with Art Nouveau language. And it has these friezes around the corridors on the different levels, almost like they've just been stenciled by the painters. And there's a compass. So I had that compass right at the beginning, and I think probably I should end with that because I've given you enough, and also the swans are kind of a nice way to end. I think that's enough from me. Thank you very much for your attention.